Hello and welcome to the next Flip Preaching video. My name's Andy. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to look at a passage which follows immediately on from the one from last week, the parable of the sower. So this week, still in Matthew 13, is 24 to 30, again skipping a little bit, and then 36 to 43. So it's another parable about seeds and about troubles. Whereas the parable of the sower talked about different obstacles for spiritual growth, this one hones in on the weeds. And in fact, later in this, when the disciples asked Jesus to explain the parable, they call it the parable of the weeds. So there we go, the parable of the weeds. It's, I think, a story of why things go wrong. It's an explanation of why things go wrong in this world. It's an explanation of why there's evil, why there's difficulty, why there's problem in this world. So Jesus tells the story briefly of a man who planted good seed, good wheat seed. It's really important to remember this is good seed that the farmer planted. But then when the wheat comes up and begins to bear fruit, they realise that some of the plants growing aren't wheat, they're something else. And the workers say, shall we rip up the weeds? And the householder says, no need to do that, because you might damage some of the good wheat by pulling up the weeds because the roots have got entangled. So leave them all until the end. When we harvest them all, then we'll sort them out and we'll get rid of the weeds and leave the wheat as they are. Okay, so what does this mean? Firstly, I think this passage has been mistranslated, misinterpreted in a really dangerous way for much of the church's history. And it begins, I think, with Augustine. Augustine thought that what this represented was the church. So the field was the church. And in the church, there are some good people, good Christians, and some bad Christians, which for Augustine were the people who he disagreed with. He was in a particular kind of fight with a particular sort of break-off group called the Donatists at the time. So he interpreted this as saying there are some good people in the church, but some bad people, weeds put there by the devil. And therefore, that's why things aren't as united in the church as they might be. But the thing is, Jesus explains the parable, and he says it's not the church, it's the world. And the seeds planted, the weeds are planted by the enemy, by the devil. They're not humans. They're kind of spiritual forces of opposition. It's not the case that there are good humans, bad humans. The humans are the wheat. We're the children of God. We're the ones put there in the first place. And the weeds are the children of the devil, it says. I don't know what your theology of evil and the devil is, but this passage seems to assume that there is an evil force of opposition that is trying to counteract the work of God. Okay, these weeds, they're the Greek word zizania translates to darnel. This is a type of plant which looks very much like wheat. It's almost impossible to tell the difference until the seeds start to show, till the heads start to form, and then they look quite different. But the seeds themselves are very similar. And darnel has evolved to grow alongside wheat. So unless you do anything about it, which we tended to have done now in most developed countries, you get darnel wherever there's wheat. It just grows up alongside, and darnel is toxic. It's a toxic weed that you don't want around. So what's this saying to us about the state of the world? I think it tells us a few things. Firstly, it says that this is a battle. There is good and evil in the world. There's a dualistic sort of narrative running beneath this, the idea that God wants his wheat to grow, but there's someone trying to sabotage this process. But it's also saying that process won't win. Although for the time being, we're in a mixture of wheat and darnel, good and evil together. In the end, God always gets what God wants. So therefore, in the end, they will be sorted out, and the darnel will be disposed of. It will be burnt up in fire. And it says that the children will be left to shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father, much like Jesus at the Transfiguration. A couple of the Old Testament passages, which I think are quite interesting to look at alongside here, I've included on the sheet. So let's go right back to the start. Genesis 1. Genesis 1:12, where it talks about the earth putting forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and the fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. This is the same language in the Greek version of the Old Testament, which is quoted word for word in Matthew here. So the bit about the plants came up and bore grain, that's a quote from Genesis. So God, it says, intended you and I to be planted, and he considers us good. And the Genesis story is about God creating goodness out of chaos. So in the midst of the chaos, where Genesis 1 starts with, God plants goodness, and he separates the waters from the land, which we'll come to in a few weeks' time, and plants good seed. But we've got this problem about the bad seed that's growing alongside, and it's evident that there's a lot wrong with this world. There's a lot wrong with this world. There's a lot wrong with us. As well as being pure children of God, good seed, I'm aware, and you're presumably, you're aware that you fail and you've got darnel growing up around your roots. We're entangled with this weed, and God will do something about it. Okay, firstly, let's have a look at this Ephesians 6 passage, which says that we might be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. So we put on the armour of God. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but is against the rulers, the authorities, the cosmic powers of this present darkness. So again, this is another way of saying that the weeds, the evil in the world, isn't fundamentally humans. It's humans with their roots tangled up in a spiritual force of evil. That's what the Bible writers are saying. And as Christians, that's what we need to work on interpreting, how we think this works for us today. But the thing is, people are not the problem. The people have been corrupted. The people have been messed up by this weed growing around their roots and growing up with them. And finally, let's have a look at Exodus 15. Just a little bit. This is about after the Exodus has happened, this is God saving his people, his beloved people, from captivity, setting forth a new nation. And in the Exodus story, Pharaoh and his minions are never given a name. And we think that this is a kind of way of saying that Pharaoh represents evil in all of its form. Pharaoh is kind of like Satan. And this is the account of the people crossing through the sea. As we'll see in a few weeks' time, we mentioned it before, the sea is always a symbol of evil in the world. So the people have broken through the sea. They've gone through. And then it describes the forces of evil, Pharaoh's forces, not just regular Egyptian men and women, but this represents the forces of the evil one being destroyed in the water. And it uses the language of chaff. So in the middle, it says, in the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew your adversaries. You sent out your fury. It consumed them like stubble. Stubble meaning the bits of the crop that you don't want. So throughout the Bible, there's this narrative of God planting good seed in the midst of trouble. And they kind of coexist awkwardly for us. But in the end, God will sort out the stubble and get rid of it. And that's what hell is for, I believe, in the Bible. Hell, the images of burning in hell, that's for Satan and Satan's minions, not people, not wheat, but the weeds. So I wonder what you make of this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.